vision, it gets done. And that's what we need at the federal level. We need a balanced budget constitutional amendment. Cut, cap, and balance. It's an important formula, simple but substantive, to get us to where we need to be.
The senators consumed 12 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. So I urge all of my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, to come together and continue this debate and move it to the next level. As I said when I began, the first thing I want to do is recognize and celebrate progress, because finally, after months of resistance from the distinguished majority leader, we're finally here on the Senate floor actually talking about our most pressing challenge, spending and debt. But it is a sense of the Senate resolution. It is a procedural motion. So let's get to the real substance by having meaningful legislation, cut, cap, balance legislation put on the floor of the Senate, open to amendments, open to wide-ranging debate. That's the history and tradition of the Senate. Unfortunately, it hasn't been the practice of the Senate all that much in recent years, but we're trying to get back to that. So let's put that meaningful, substantive legislation about spending a debt on the floor of the Senate, have that debate, have amendments, have a free flow of ideas. Cut, cap, and balance. We can get there. We can do the work of the American people. We can rein in this runaway federal spending and debt, and we must. And we must now. Because if we fail to meet this challenge this year, if we fail to meet this challenge this year, I believe there are going to be dire, dire consequences for our economy and for all American families as a result. Having this topic on the floor of the Senate is a start, but it's only a start. Let's build on this, put substantive legislation on the floor about spending and debt, and act on that meaningful, substantive legislation. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
President,
Senator from New York.
before I begin on my time, I'd like to ask my colleague from Louisiana if he'd answer a question.
I'd be happy to.
Great. I thank my colleague, and he is right. We should move on this year. We certainly agree with that. Of course, the balanced budget amendment wouldn't take effect for years to come. But my colleague just voted for the Ryan budget, which actually increased the deficit. Not only did it not move deficit numbers down, but it increased the deficit. So how can he reconcile all this nice, grandiose talk about a balanced budget amendment with voting for a budget that actually increased the deficit?
Well, first of all, I voted for that budget as well as the Toomey budget. The Toomey budget, which was my first choice preference, balances the budget in 10 years. That would be my first choice. The Ryan budget gets us way down the path compared to anything else proposed on the Democratic side, like the President's budget, which on the Senate floor actually got 0 votes out of 100. So while the Ryan budget is not my first choice, it's a dramatic improvement on the path we're currently on.
I would just note to my colleague reclaiming my time that the Ryan budget is not a dramatic step in that direction. The Ryan budget, as I understand it, does not do a thing in the first decade to reduce the deficit. It cuts a lot of spending, but it also cuts taxes, and it raises defense spending.
If I may respond
Please.
through the chair, that is not true. It reduces the deficit. It doesn't balance the budget within the 10-year window, which is my strong preference. The Toomey budget does do that, but it gets us going in the right direction. It reduces the deficit, and it's a particularly dramatic improvement over anything proposed by this administration.
Okay.
But I thank my colleague.
I thank my colleague, and I would just say it's time to walk the walk, not talk the talk. Whenever folks refuse to step up to the plate to actually balance the budget, last president to do so being Bill Clinton, they start talking about a way distant in the future balanced budget amendment. This balanced budget amendment they talk about is not going to solve our problem in the next 5 years. We have to get to work right now. And that's what we're trying to do on this side with a fair and balanced approach. The balanced budget amendment that my colleague speaks about would, if you look by its amounts, 18% GDP, it cuts deeper than the Ryan budget, would end Medicare as we know it, would mean that things that we take for granted, like food safety inspectors and flight inspectors, would have to be cut. And then it makes it impossible to close tax loopholes for millionaires and billionaires. It is not a balanced budget amendment. It is an unbalanced budget amendment because it simply reflects an ideological view that my good colleague and friend from Louisiana has, but does not reflect the views of either a majority of this chamber or certainly the American people. So let's walk the walk. Let's not just talk the talk. I think that's very important to note. Cutting spending, which is done in the Ryan budget, is not going to work in terms of balancing the budget. You just can't unless you just decimate things like Medicare without revenues. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. I rise today in support of the sense of the Senate on shared sacrifice. The clock is ticking. Time is running short to reach a deal on reducing the deficit and raising the debt ceiling. We are walking the walk, not simply talking the talk about some ephemeral balanced budget amendment that is unbalanced and will not pass. Yesterday, the President said that we needed to reach a deal within 2 weeks in order to avoid roiling the financial markets. Democrats are working in good faith, identifying spending cuts and tax loopholes to close. And what are our Republican colleagues doing? Well, since stalking out of the negotiations 2 weeks ago, they're now sticking to their blind ideology and playing political games, like inviting the President to come to the Capitol when they know he can't, to deliver a message he's already heard. And the Republican leader has continued to insist that we can't raise a single dollar in revenue, no matter how wasteful the tax break or how generous the subsidy. Mr. President, here's what it's coming down to. Madam President, here's what it's coming down to. In the home stretch of negotiations, our Republican colleagues seem willing to tank the economy rather than end a single tax subsidy. Democrats are committed to reducing the deficit and getting our nation back on a sensible fiscal track. But we know that everyone must pay their fair share. We know there has to be compromise to get things done. You can't just draw a line in the sand and say my way or no way. It'll lead to fiscal Armageddon. So over the past several weeks, we've offered a number of wasteful tax breaks that should be ended as part of the debt ceiling deal. Ending subsidies for the oil and gas industry making record profits, the ethanol industry, which 36 members on the floor, including the majority leader, supported to their credit, and corporate jet owners will save us tens of billions of dollars. Now, paradoxically, our Republican colleagues are now arguing that tax breaks for oil companies and corporate jet owners are too small to consider ending. They have argued that because they will only save taxpayers tens of billions of dollars. They say that's not enough, and so we shouldn't be discussing them now. Well, Mr. President, I disagree. Tens of billions of dollars that we can save on wasteful subsidies are certainly worth pursuing. But let's turn our attention to the matter at hand. One of the biggest of all taxpayer giveaways that Democrats are trying to end, tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. I rise today in strong support of the Senate resolution that says simply, instead of ending Medicare as we know it, instead of cutting college scholarships and cancer research, instead of balancing the budget solely on the backs of the middle class, let's end some breaks. Let's end tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. Let me repeat that, because that's the essence of our dispute here, of our disagreement. You can't varnish it any other way. I know the other side tries to say they're raising taxes, trying to imply that we want to do it on middle-class people. We don't. We're not going to touch a person whose income is below $250,000. Some of us would even go higher, $500,000, $1 million. But every one of us on this side says if you're a millionaire, You should share some of the sacrifice. And the other side resists, and then they try to hide by saying it's raising taxes. It's not raising taxes on average folks. It's not raising taxes at all. It's simply going back to the level under Bill Clinton, where we had record prosperity, record jobs, and record income growth for the highest-end people, as well as for middle-class people got income growth as well. So let me repeat the nub of this and why we have this resolution on the floor. Here's what it says. Instead of ending Medicare as we know it, instead of cutting college scholarships and cancer research, instead of balancing the budget on the backs of the middle class, let's end tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. This would save over $100 billion a year and hundreds of billions in the long run. It's not just a small amount. I ask my Republican colleagues, is that savings significant enough to at least merit discussion and not just take it off the table? The GOP budget would end Medicare as we know it, to give hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans. The resolution says simply, don't let that happen. And let me say this, I respect people who have made a lot of money. There are many of them in my state. They work hard. God bless them. But many of them, when you talk to them, they're the first to say they should share in the sacrifice. There are some who say no, but I don't think they represent mainstream America or mainstream American opinion. Now, in normal times, this would be a consensus opinion, the fact that we shouldn't end Medicare as we know it to give hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks to the richest Americans. In normal times, that would be a consensus position. Republican presidents and political leaders have long supported raising revenue combined with cutting spending to reduce deficits. Ronald Reagan, for instance, because he wanted to shrink government, but he was fiscally responsible. But the Republican Party has been dragged so far to the right by an ideological fringe that they now see this balanced approach as an extreme position. What it comes down to is this. Would Republicans rather end Medicare than end tax breaks for billionaires? It's a simple choice. And this resolution will make the answer to that question clear. Again, will Republicans do anything, even risk a default, to protect tax breaks on the highest income people, millionaires and billionaires? And would they rather end Medicare and solely rely on cuts that hurt the middle class than admit that some tax subsidies, such as those for big oil companies and corporate jet owners, are a waste of taxpayer dollars? Well, Madam President, we will soon find out. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Indiana.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to speak to the chamber here for not to exceed 20 minutes.
Without objection.
I don't anticipate taking 20 minutes of time. I hope to be back on the floor this afternoon talking about a related subject, but I do want to take the opportunity essentially to bring us back to what the central problem that we're facing is in this chamber and in this country, and that is dealing with an out-of-control spending program in Washington, D.C. that has occurred over many, many years. In fact, the accumulation of debt not only is at the government level, but it's been at the state level, it's been at the local level, it's been at the personal and the private level. We have been in a cycle of debt accumulation, which simply is coming to an end, and it's coming to an end because we no longer can afford to pay the interest and no longer can afford to fulfill the promises that have been made on a political basis to people over a whole series of years, both by Democrats and Republicans, and only accelerated in a dramatic fashion in the last 3 years, where we have seen an explosion of spending at the federal level that simply cannot continue and be paid for under any system of taxation at all. And so what we've seen here is a nice deflection away from the central issue, a deflection into, well, the whole thing comes down to whether or not we tax millionaires and billionaires. and the President's speech last week, which set the stage for all this discussion, is a nice deflection away from what we all know that we need to do. And what we need to do is address this out-of-control deficit, out-of-control accumulation of debt that is simply unsustainable. Now, it's pure arithmetic, and it's easy arithmetic. When you spend $3.7 trillion a year and your revenues coming in are only $2.2 trillion a year, you are racking up on a year-by-year basis a $1.5 or greater trillion a year deficit. And that deficit has to be paid. And how is it paid? Well, 40 cents of every dollar that is spent has to be borrowed in order to pay the promises that have been made. And so until we as a body put aside this gotcha stuff that may be politically positioning for the 2012 election, but doesn't address the real problem, we're not going to solve that problem. There's been a lot of posturing going on, and I'm not here to address that in specific detail at this particular point in time, except to say that we have to refocus on the real task before us. And the real task before us is understood by the American people. They understand that we cannot continue spending money at the rate that we are spending it. Our debt has skyrocketed 35% to a limit of $14.3 trillion in just the last 2 years. Our annual deficit, our yearly deficit now is 3 times greater than the highest deficit of the previous administration. And today, as a result of a stagnant economy and as a result of uncertainty imposed within our economic system, we have 14 million Americans out of work, and that number is conservative because those are the ones that are looking for work. Those are the ones that have given up. Those that have given up amount to a significant number, and those that may never have an opportunity to get back in the workforce ought to be of great concern to us. These facts, combined with the warnings that have been given to us by the financial markets, should make it clear to all of us, from the President to members of Congress and both parties and to the American people, that this current plan that we are operating under, the President's economic plan, is not working. That the plan of spending more and borrowing more is not getting our economy back to where it ought to be and not getting people back to work. Over the weekend, I was privileged to be able to give a Republican address following the President's address to the nation, his weekly address. And then in that, I suggested that instead of the current proposal and plans that we are operating under this presidency, we ought to look to models that are actually functioning much better and working and see what we can learn from that. And representing the state of Indiana, I'm proud to be able to say that the model that our state has used is taking our state from a deficit position to a surplus position without raising taxes, by reducing spending and actually cutting taxes and balancing our budget. We have now seen a significant change in the financial fortune of the state of Indiana and Hoosiers that occupy that state. This administration has increased spending, increased borrowing, raised taxes, and expanded the growth of government. And now the credit agencies are looking at our federal government and warning of dire consequences and downgrading of our debt. At the same time, the model used in my state of Indiana, which cut taxes, cut spending, and balanced our budget, has now awarded us with a AAA credit rating, the best rating that you can get. Now, the President's plan during this time, the only one that we can work off of is his submitted $4 trillion budget, which would have increased deficit spending, not decreased it. Interestingly enough, the only plan that we have in front of us, comprehensive plan at this point in time from the President or his party, is the plan the President introduced. We've had some nice speeches and we've had some nice rhetoric. We've heard about the dire consequences of not coming up with a sensible plan before we hit the debt limit ceiling now scheduled for August 2nd. But the only concrete plan proposed to us here in this chamber and in the House of Representatives from the opposition is a $4 trillion budget which was voted on here in the Senate and was defeated by a unanimous vote. Not one Democrat voted for the President's budget plan, yet no alternate plan has been proposed. Now, there may be one in the works. We would like to see it. We would like to work off it. I don't understand how you can negotiate any kind of a final proposal if you don't have something to work with that the other side has proposed. And the only thing we now have before us is simply a resolution on the matter of whether or not we ought to tax millionaires and billionaires. Even if we went forward and did that, even if we took 100% of all of the income earned by all of those who are in the billionaire category, it would be a drop in the bucket compared to what we need to do. It would do nothing to adjust and reform spending programs and duplication of spending and bureaucratic overlap here in Washington that has been accumulating for year after year after year. And so it's a nice diversion. It's a nice way of playing class warfare. It's a nice way maybe of setting yourself up for some good talking points back home. It's a nice way of positioning yourself for some good rhetoric back home if you're talking about running for re-election. But it doesn't address the problem that we have. And so here we are, having canceled our July 4th recess in order to discuss the budget and discuss the plight that we're in and try to come together and fashion a plan that we can assure the American people will put us on a much sounder fiscal path and will calm the financial markets and the rating agencies and will reassure those who invest their money in America from all over the world that we finally have gotten our hands around the problem and we're coming up with sensible solutions. And America will continue to be a safe place to invest your money, and the dollar will continue to be a sound currency for the world to put their confidence in. I was encouraged by the President's statement recently that we ought to move forward. As you know, last week, the President's hopefully remarks on the budget were simply perhaps to satisfy his base or to politically position themselves for more serious negotiations. I hope that's the case. But it's important that the President has indicated, I believe, that we must take bold steps. We must take them now in anticipation of what needs to be done by August 2nd, that he has called for a summit tomorrow. It's time that we put aside the political rhetoric, the gamesmanship. It's time that we got down to some serious bargaining and negotiating and coming up with what I think, and I think most of us believe, is necessary in order to accomplish what we need to in addressing this very serious problem that has very serious consequences. There is agreement, I trust, that we need serious spending reductions. Some have estimated it in the $2 trillion range over a 10-year period of time. Others to say to get at the problem and really credibly address it, it needs to be double that or more, in the $4 to $5 trillion range. There needs to be a commitment to restructure entitlement programs. We all understand and know that the three major entitlement programs of Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, and especially Medicare, are running out of money, are not sustainable under the current program, and there needs to be restructuring. Now, once again, this is something that is ripe for political positioning and posturing. The fact of the matter is that unless we address structural changes in the entitlement programs, those programs will have to be drastically reduced, if not eliminated, in the future because they are simply not sustainable given the current amount of recipients drawing benefits as opposed to the money that is going into those programs. And so anyone who says we're doing this on the backs of senior citizens on low income are not realistically acknowledging the facts of the matter and that these programs are going broke. So those that are standing up, and there are some on both sides of the aisle, those that are standing up and saying this has to be part of our solution to our spending and deficit problem, if they are saying that this is not part of the solution, they simply are telling seniors, we're going to allow your program to go broke or there are going to be severe consequences. Those that are advocating this, to the contrary, are basically saying we're trying to save those programs. We're trying to ensure benefits for the future, needed health care benefits under Medicare and needed benefits under Medicaid and needed income under Social Security that people are depending on. We're trying to save those programs and keep those programs solvent so that a few years from now, as the trustees have indicated in their latest report on Medicare, in a few years from now, we will not run into a much more serious problem which will require much more drastic action. Also, what we need to do is ensure that we have enforcement programs in so that whatever programs, cuts and reductions and changes are made and reforms are made are not overturned by a future Congress. Enforcement programs to do what we are really obligated to do on this floor, but don't seem to often have the political will to address effectively, programs that will automatically kick in to ensure that the goals that we have established will be reached, whether or not we have the political will to go forward and do it ourselves. Yes, I do support a balanced budget. If we had had that balanced budget passed in the mid-90s when we had 2 attempts and it failed by 1 vote each time, we would not find ourselves in this position now. We would have done what states across America have had to do, and that is go be straight out with their constituents and simply say, yes, you can have this new program. Yes, we can expand spending here. But constitutionally, we are mandated to balance our budget, and so we have 2 options of getting there. We can either reduce spending in other areas if this is more important and has a higher priority and use that money to pay for it, or we can raise your taxes. Now let's decide which you want to do. Is this program of such necessity and has the majority support in the state or the locality, and the public is willing to support it with increased taxes, not unlike the school referendums where the school puts forward a plan to improve the facilities or hire new teachers and puts a referendum before the people of the school district and say, if you're willing to raise your property taxes, we can do this with education. Sometimes they're passed, sometimes they fail. But it gives the public the opportunity to determine whether or not they'll pay for it. And it leaves the ultimate financial position at a level of balance. And so we should address that. There's a dispute or a difference of opinion between just what the components of a balanced budget should be. We should have that debate. We should go forward with that. We should work towards some sensible solution. But the only way we're going to guarantee the American people that we're not going to return to our profligate ways is to establish and enact and give to the states the opportunity to enact a constitutional amendment to balance the budget for future spending. And finally, I want to include the need for comprehensive tax reform. As you know, as many know, in the chamber here, Senator Wyden and I, on a bipartisan basis, have introduced comprehensive tax reform. We're going to talk about that a little bit later this afternoon. We've essentially said that the tax code is dysfunctional. It does not promote growth and efficiency. It needs to be reformed. There's general consensus on that. We have proposed a way to do it. We're open to suggestions of better ways if someone else has better ideas. We do believe that a lot of the subsidies and tax exclusions and expenditures in the tax code are unfair. They're put in for the benefit of a few and not the many. That part needs to be reformed. There's a very interesting editorial this morning in the Wall Street Journal talking about the ability to broaden the tax base by eliminating many of these exclusions, but in return lowering the rates, whether they be individual or corporate rates, that would give us the opportunity to promote growth, which is an essential part of our reaching fiscal balance and fiscal sanity. The time is now. The time is not after the 2012 election. The dire situation which we find ourselves in is being watched worldwide by financial markets, by all of those who lend us money. They want to know what the financial future of the United States is going to be. They want to know whether or not we have the will and the commitment to address our very serious political situation, financial situation, and the political situation that goes along with it. Are we willing to rise above the political and do what is appropriate and necessary for this country? So, and the President said, right now we've got a unique opportunity to do something big. I couldn't agree with that statement more. And I'm glad that the President has finally come on board and said, let's get engaged together and negotiate something big, something that will solve the problem. Now is the time for us and the unique opportunity for the President to lead. But frankly, we need more than rhetoric. We need specifics. And we need to put it on the table. We need more than some kind of rant against those who fly in corporate jets, as if that's going to, that subsidy, which is the depreciation issue in the tax code and actually passed by a Democrat Congress, is going to solve the problem. Or whether we're going to impose a higher tax on billionaires and millionaires, and even if those taxes went up to 100%, it's a drop in the bucket. This is not a responsible way to go forward and negotiate what we need to negotiate. So let's do it. The American people understand it. They voted at the polls in November of 2010 in a way that should send a signal here that we understand what's going on and we want to send people to Washington that will address this very problem. And as this thing is cascaded into 2011, and we've dithered and pushed off and rebalanced, rethought through what the schedule is, American people are getting increasingly frustrated over our inability to come to terms with this current situation that we face. So now is the time. Now is the time to put politics secondary to what is right for America and what is right for Americans. And we have that opportunity, a unique opportunity. And in one sense, it's good that we are running up against this debt limit crisis, because it is forcing us to stop pushing this thing down the road, to stop delaying and waiting until after the next election. It is forcing us to take action now. And so we've got about 4 weeks here to do what is right for the American people, but more importantly, what is right for the future of America, our children and grandchildren and generations to come. If we're going to be that generation that saddles them with debt which they can't climb out of, and they aren't able to live the simple American dream of raising a family, owning a home or a place to live, providing for the education of their children, and participating in the wonderful experience that this country has had through sacrifice and commitment and dedication over all these years. If we're turning that over to our children and with that broken dream and broken promise, we have not done our job. So we're here to do it now. The time is now. Let's have the political will to do it. Let's subordinate our political considerations for 2012, do what's right, and then we will have left a legacy, win, lose, or draw politically, a legacy that's important for this country. Madam President, I yield, if I have any time left, the balance of that time.
The senator has consumed his 20 minutes. Senator from Oklahoma.
Madam President, first of all, I stand here in total agreement with everything my good friend from Indiana has said, and I think particularly the emphasis, the time is right. It's now. You know, we've been talking about a balanced budget amendment. We've been talking about this problem for many, many years. To me, I feel great frustration that I'm even here right now in the chamber. We've quite often, what I do, I have a kind of a regular schedule. If I'm not on a weekend in Iraq, Afghanistan, or Africa or someplace having to do with the duties that I have as a second-ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, I'm back in Oklahoma. And I've been a pilot for 50 years, and I get in a little plane, and I go out, and I talk to real people. And people shake their heads and say, you know, why are we still talking about this? Why aren't we doing it? Why is it that we are so wrapped up in this thing? And the answer, there's not an easy answer to this thing. We're supposed to be back here, I guess, talking about the Libya resolution. I think we all realize that that's something that kind of diverts the attention of the American people from the real problem. The real problem, of course, is the deficit. Now, as I see where we are and look at some of the alternatives that they have, the senator from Indiana talked about the fact that the Democrats want to now, I guess tomorrow morning, vote on some kind of a bill that is going to be a tax increase on the millionaires. So we're right back again with our class warfare. Now, if we were to rephrase that statement from an economic perspective, we'd say something like this. It's the sense of the Senate that we should raise taxes on America's job creators and entrepreneurs to prevent the economy from recovering from this recession, because that's exactly what we'd be doing. Yesterday, I searched through a database of the IRS, their historical tax data, and if we were to tax all of the income of those individuals making $1 million or more at a 100% tax rate, in other words, take every cent they have, tax them all, the total amount of revenue that would be generated would be $700 billion. Now, stop and think about that. $700 billion is way less than half of the deficit that President Obama gave us just this year, $1.65 trillion deficit. And so we're not talking, it's clearly a deceptive thing. The American people, I think they assume they're so dumb that they think they can tax millionaires and get us out of this mess. According to the Joint Committee on Taxation, the 750,000 Americans in the highest tax bracket report less than half of the total net business income earned in this country. This is income that comes from flow-through entities like the LLCs and partnerships. In other words, it comes from small businesses. Now, if we were to tax the small businesses, as they're going to attempt to do by saying they're taxing the millionaires, who's going to be able to grow their small businesses? I don't know. I don't have the answer. No one. I guess that's the answer. There's no question we have a serious problem in Washington. Our debt's at the legal limit of $14.3 trillion. And what's caused this problem? It's spending. In the short 2.5 years since coming to office, President Obama has managed to increase spending by 30%. 30%. He incurred $1 trillion deficits each year and pushed our national debt up by 35%. The statistic that no one seems to care about, and we say it over and over again, that this president has increased the debt of America more in his 2.5 years than all presidents throughout the history of America, from George Washington to George W. Bush. And let me say, this isn't the first time this is coming up. Every time you turn around in this administration, well, we're going to have to increase the debt limit. If not, some great crisis is going to take place. We did this in February 17th, 2009. I voted against it, but they increased the debt limit at that time. If you remember, that was the $800 billion stimulus bill. Then in December of 2009, a standalone bill to increase the debt limit of $290 billion. It passed. So, you know, we remember so well the saying in Tim Geithner saying, if we don't do this, it's going to ruin our credit nationwide. Then again, February of 2010, $1.9 trillion. They increased it again. The same thing. You got to draw the line someplace. There's going to be some point at which you're going to say, no, we're not going to do it unless we get some reductions in some fiscal sanity that's built into it. So we have right now, since reaching the legal limit, the Treasury's been shuffling money around to pay bills, and they'll run out of ways to do this on August 2nd. And if agreement to raise the debt limit has not been reached by then, Treasury will have to start deciding which bills to pay and which bills not to pay, and nobody wants that. But in order to raise the debt ceiling, we've got to lock in the reforms necessary to permanently prevent this income debt crisis. You know, Madam President, we all know the scary statistics. But to me, solving the problem is easy. We spent our way into this problem, so we need to stop spending our way to get out of it. Tax revenue has not been our problem, and tax hikes shouldn't be a part of the solution. Regardless, President Obama has made very clear that he wants tax increases to be included in any kind of a debt limit deal. Sure, he may say that he just wants to raise taxes on millionaires and billionaires. You're going to hear it over and over again. And all these people out there are supposed to believe this. It's just not true. As I said earlier, to the folks he's targeting are those that own small businesses, and they're the ones who are creating jobs. When you target tax hikes on folks like these, you hurt everybody. This is not what we need to do. Our economy is stalling and our unemployment rate is still above 9%. Instead, we need to cut spending in the short term, cap. This is the program that many people have adhered to now. I don't know how many we have, but I think a pledge includes about 30 members that say we need to cut spending short term, cap spending in the medium term, and balance the budget in the long term to put the nation on a sustainable, limited government path. This is the only way out of this mess. And, you know, I've been a leader here. I can remember back when I introduced the HELP Act. That was when this president first came in, and he wanted to take the non-discretionary or the discretionary non-defense spending and freeze it at the new level after he'd increased it by 20%. I said, no, let's go back to 2008 levels. If we had done that, we would not be facing the problem that we have. Decades ago, when I was in the state legislature, there was a great senator from Nebraska named Carl Curtis. He came to me one day and he said, you know, I've been trying to pass a balanced budget amendment here in the United States Senate for decades. And the argument they use against it is, well, the states will never ratify it. So he came up with this idea, let's pre-ratify a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Well, that sounded great to me, and so I introduced a resolution in the Oklahoma State Senate pre-ratifying, which we did, a budget balancing amendment to the Constitution. That was really kind of fun. We came within 2 or 3 states of doing this, or we wouldn't be here today with the problem that we are facing. So when you look and you say that it's going to be difficult, it's not difficult. But I really believe that the only way to be able to pull this thing off and to really resolve the problem is to do something about a balanced budget amendment. So we have proposed one. It's out there. Senator Hatch, I know, is active in this. We're all looking at it. And during peacetime, the amendment would require a 2/3 majority in both chambers of Congress to authorize a specific deficit funding level for a fiscal year. We all understand emergencies can come up. We can have wars, in which case we need to do something about it. And this allows an escape, but it means 2/3 of the majority of the House and the Senate would have to agree to it. And importantly, the balanced budget amendment would require a 2/3 majority in both chambers to pass any, I repeat, any kind of a tax increase. Our problems are tax increases, and that's what the President wants more of. The balanced budget amendment is the only reform that will put our nation in a true path to permanent fiscal stability. And this is what we need to do. This balanced budget amendment is the reform we need, and I pledge to oppose any deal to increase the debt limit that does not immediately cut the spending in the short term, cap the spending in the medium term, and include a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. So I urge the members to seize upon this opportunity. We have not had a serious opportunity at a balanced budget amendment now for decades. But the time is here now because we've never faced this before. We've never had a president that has proposed and passed $5 trillion of deficit in 2.5 years. And the people of America are not dumb. They know we can't sustain that. So they're going to say, all right, if we have to all bite the bullet and do this thing, we need to do it. The time is right. And I agree with the senator from Indiana who said that there hasn't been a time before that is right, but this time is right. Now that this legislative agenda is dead that we've been talking about, the President has pursued aggressive regulations, especially through the EPA, that will seriously harm the economy. I think a lot of people are confined in their thinking about the fact that we're spending too much money. They don't realize that there's also a cost to overregulation. Right now, almost everything that the liberals have tried to pass through here, such as cap and trade, the President and his colleagues in the House and the Senate are trying to do through regulation, through the EPA. And that is just as expensive as spending money. So I don't think this is rocket science. It's something that we can pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution and put Americans back to work. And these are the only things that will resolve our debt problems. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Oklahoma,
I'd ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
without objection.
I've been listening to the debate this morning, and it's really concerning to me because as a physician, I'm trained to diagnose disease. Disease, if you break that word up, is dis-ease. We're not at ease. And I hear us talking all around. I listened to the senior senator from New York very carefully in what he had to say. And I wanted to spend a few minutes actually disputing what he had to say. Because the premise, he said, was that if we don't raise taxes, that the vital things that are legitimate roles for the federal government would have to be eliminated. And I find that very curious, because what is lacking in the Senate body today is an actual knowledge of all the things that we're doing. And I go back to March when the GAO report came out on the levels of duplication within the federal government. And that report was eye-opening to many senators. And the fact is that report only covered the first third of the federal government. I've long said during the past 7 years in the Senate that one of our problems is the government's so big, we don't know everything it does. And what came out of that report was a tremendous list of duplications, programs that do exactly the same thing in multiple different agencies. And for example, we have 124 different programs to encourage students in math, science, engineering, and technology. Why would we do that? Why would we pay for 124 sets of administration? Why would we have the first program for science, technology, engineering, and math that doesn't have a metric on it to see that it works? Well, you know what the report said is none of them have a metric on it to measure whether or not it's effective. We have 47 different job training programs. 47. The report said all but 3 of them overlap one another. And none of those have any metric to see if they're effective or work. They cost $18 billion a year. We have 42 different programs to teach Americans how to be creditworthy and financially sound. 42 across 6 different agencies. The fact is the Senate doesn't know what it's talking about. When we make statements that saying if in fact we make major cuts in the discretionary portion of our budget, that the things that we count on will have to be sacrificed, it's just not true. For there is at a minimum $350 billion a year spent on duplication within the federal government and waste. That doesn't count fraud, which is at least $100 billion a year in Medicare. It doesn't count the Pentagon, where we have the Pentagon having duplicate weapon systems, non-competitive contracts, cost-plus contracts where we have requirement creep so that they end up costing much more than they ever should because we don't have a responsible person over there saying, no, you can't have everything you want. What we want is to have the things that we need. So this whole idea that the sacrifices that need to be made are going to be highly painful is just untrue, because that's how much waste there is in the federal government. At least $350 billion a year. And that doesn't count the $100 billion in Medicare that's defrauded and waste and wrongly paid. Their improper payment rate, which is 97% overpayments, is in excess of $10 billion a year. So if you have $100 billion worth of fraud and then an improper payment rate that's around 10%, we could easily solve our budget problems just by eliminating duplication and eliminating fraud. But that requires a lot of hard work to do the oversight. It requires a lot of legislative work to eliminate duplication. It requires us to stand up and do what is necessary for our country. We don't have a problem in general with revenues. What we have a problem is the federal government's taken 26% of our GDP just to operate itself, and 40% of that is borrowed. So as a physician, what my training would tell me to do is go directly to the disease. Don't treat the symptoms of the disease. Go directly to where the disease is. And the disease is we have a magnitude, orders of magnitude, of duplication, all well-meaning, all well-intentioned, that we won't sit down and work on eliminating. So I thought I'd just spend a few minutes just going through by department. The Department of Agriculture has 130 duplicative programs. 130. And I will submit for the record just a few of these because I don't want the record to be too many. But just for example, biomass programs at the Department of Agriculture. We have the Biomass Crop Assistance Program, the Biorefinery Program for Advanced Fuels, the Bio-Based Products and Bioenergy Program, the Biorefinery Repowering Assistance Program, the New Era Rural Technology Competitive Grants Programs for biomass. Those could all be combined into one at a third of the cost with exactly the same results. But we don't have the energy, the time, or the motivation to go solve those problems. So the problem isn't the debt and the deficit. The problem is the Congress. The lack of a work ethic to really roll up our sleeves and dig into it. We have 16 export assistance programs just for the Department of Agriculture. Department of Commerce, 18 different duplicative programs. Department of Education, 230 identical duplicative programs in different branches. And the only reason we know that is because the Department of Education is the only department in the federal government that actually knows all their programs. There's not one other agency who actually knows all their programs. That's why it was important to get the GAO report. And we've just seen the first third of it. When we get the other two-thirds, the next third will come in February of next year. We'll have two-thirds of the federal government. You know what it's going to show? It's going to show over $400 billion worth of duplications. So the problem isn't that we don't have enough revenue. The problem is that we're wasteful in almost everything that we do because Congress won't do the appropriate oversight for the things that are legitimate roles for the federal government. And the first person doesn't have to have any risk of no food safety. The first person doesn't have to have any risk of not having Medicare or not having their Social Security. The first person doesn't have to have any risk if the Congress will actually do its job. Yet we refuse to do our job. Because each one of these little programs has a little political body in itself that's taking and sucking off the federal government. Many times not a legitimate role under the enumerated powers of the Constitution that's a role for the federal government. I get letters all the time in my office, please fund this, please fund this. My answer back is, show me in the enumerated powers where it's the role of the federal government to do that. If it's truly our role, I'm for us doing it. But if, in fact, the enumerated powers, as originally written and as evidenced by the Federalist Papers, say it's not a role for the federal government, then the states ought to be doing it. And better yet, we as citizens ought to be helping other citizens who have a need. But the fact is we've created this monster, out-of-control federal government. And I'm talking out of control because nobody is in control of it. Nobody has the information, which is the power to do it. which is why, knowing all this stuff, it is so frustrating that we won't eliminate the easy things that will have no impact on 99% of Americans. The only people with impact are the people that are benefiting directly from administering or gaming the programs. Department of Energy. When the Department of Energy was created, it was to eliminate our dependence on foreign energy. Our dependence at that time was 30%. It reached a peak of 67%. And thankfully, due to horizontal drilling and environmentally sound fracking, we now are at 47%. We've gone down 16 points since the technology was developed to go after resources that are here. You know, what the Congressional Research Service says, and this is a report published this year, that America has energy resources greater than the combined energy resources of China, Canada, and Saudi Arabia. We're the only country in the world where the citizens own the resources and their own government won't let them have it. We deny our own resources to our own people. And consequently, we see $4 gasoline. Not because it has to be there, and we blame speculators and we blame the large oil companies. The reason gas is $4 is because the federal government won't let us utilize the very resources that we have. 92% of the 650 million acres that the federal government owns is unavailable for resource production that can be done in a clean, environmentally friendly way with no impact whatsoever, and yet supply us valuable energy that doesn't make us dependent on countries who are not supportive of our liberties and our freedom. So what you're going to hear a lot of speeches today talking about those who've actually lived the American dream, people who've made it. I'm not saying there's not excesses. I'm one of the very few people on my side that think we ought to really change the tax code, that we ought to eliminate all the breaks, that we ought to flatten the tax code, that it will be clear, it will create confidence, it will create certainty, and that we will see the money, the $2 trillion that's sitting on the sideline that could be creating jobs in this country, actually come in and create jobs. But our problem isn't the people that have been successful. Our problem is that we, the members of Congress, aren't successful in accomplishing the task that we were sent here to do. Department of Homeland Security. More unregulated grants, 32 duplicative programs, no follow-up on the grants, no checking to see if a grant was given that they actually performed the purpose, significant amount of fraud, significant amount of improper payments, significant layers of duplication. And not even the Department of Homeland Security knows what's going on, let alone Congress, because we won't do oversight. 40 duplicate programs inside the Department of Interior. Then we have all the duplicative programs across agencies. I didn't list all of them here. 35 duplicative programs in the Department of Labor, 53 in the Department of Justice, 6 in the Department of State, 19 at the Department of Transportation, and who knows how many at the Defense Department, because the Defense Department doesn't even know. The problem that we need to address is our lack of aggressiveness in reviewing and oversighting the federal government and eliminating the duplication. It is frustrating to me as a physician to see us continue to treat the symptoms and never go after the disease. Well, this ease will eventually kill you, just like it's bleeding us now. Just like it's bleeding us as we borrow $5 billion a day. $5 billion. That's the entire budget of the state of Oklahoma every day we're borrowing. And now we have political games being played, pointing, putting our finger in the eyes of those across political lines, rather than get down to work in solving the real problems that America faces. We don't have one problem in front of us that we can't solve as a nation. We can balance our budget. We can accomplish what we are called upon to accomplish if, in fact, we will. But the one little thing that creeps in that is nauseating is the vast majority of the members of Congress aren't thinking about the problems that are in front of us right now. They're thinking about the next election. How do I advantage? And when you see that happen, what you see and what you should question is what are the motivation of the members of Congress? Is it just to get reelected? Or is it to fix the very real and urgent problems in front of us? I think too often it's about us and not our country. It's about us secure in the next election rather than our children and grandchildren secure in the next generation. And so I would put forward, as you hear the debate over the class warfare and the unfairness that is propagated that somebody has become successful and that 20% of Americans now pay 74% of all the taxes paid, that we want to tax those people more. You know, I believe everybody in this country ought to pay taxes. I don't care who you are. I don't care what program you're on. If you get a benefit from the federal government that's rightly under the enumerated powers, something the federal government should be doing, you ought to pay a tax on it. Then you're participating. Then we wouldn't have 55% of the population, eligible population voting. We'd have 75 or 85% because they'd have an involvement in it. We have an earned income tax credit program, which we pay people who are working. We actually pay them every year. But fully 25% of that's fraud. That's $17 billion a year paid out to people who aren't working, who are defrauding the IRS. We haven't done anything about it. $17 billion? Over 10 years is $170 billion. That goes a long way towards reducing our deficit, structural deficit and debt. But we won't do that. Same thing on the child tax credit. That's a fraudulent program. Fully 20% of it is fraud. Yet we